Welcome to this session, like Sean said, called Dive into 30 by 30. My name's Laura Park and I'm a Youth Leadership Council member and also a master's student studying marine conservation at Plymouth University in the UK. I'm actually currently writing my dissertation on the newest marine protected area designation in Honduras, so I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to moderate a session such as this one. Just again, a little introduction into Oceans 30 by 30, as people have previously mentioned. It's a campaign that began in 2016 by the IUCN, aiming to protect 30% of the oceans by the year 2030. And as the ocean is such a critical resource to survival, countries all over the world are now working to try and protect it. So 30 by 30, along with the UN Decade of Ocean Science, is an amazing way to start to do so. And today we have three outstanding panelists that have each prepared a 10-minute presentation on their contributions, thanks Paul, and work with the 30 by 30 campaign. This is going to be followed by a 30 to 40 minutes for question and answers from you guys. So if you have any questions throughout, please don't hesitate to submit them to the Q&A box right at the bottom of your screen throughout the session. So without further ado, our first panelist and presentation is from Karen Sack. Karen is the president and CEO of Ocean Unite, a non-profit organisation started in 2015 that drives ocean regeneration through engaging audiences on the importance of the ocean and building ocean health. Karen also brings over 25 years experience working for similar organisations on environmental issues. So Karen, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. I am hoping that magically my presentation is going to appear on the screen. It is wonderful to be with all of you today and excited to talk about one of my absolute favorite topics. I'm going to start off with a little bit of information about Ocean Unite and the organization that I work with. Then we're going to dive into the ocean for a bit and come back to dry land at the end. So let's get started. If we can go to the next slide, please. As Laura said, Ocean Unite was co-founded in 2015 by a group of philanthropists and political leaders. They include the former Costa Rican president, Jose Maria Figueres, and Sir Richard Branson. And our mission really is to deliver the science-based target of strongly protecting at least 30% of the ocean by 2030 and to build ocean resilience on a global scale. We focus on accelerating impact on the ocean rather than on our brand. We focus on building networks, facilitating collaboration, catalyzing change, and reaching into untapped constituencies. And if we can just hit next, I'm going to show you a little bit about what we do. So we have a network of 40 leaders from around the world who use their voices at key moments that matter to drive ocean conservation action. If you can hit the next. We also work on 30 by 30 by stretching our tentacles out across the world, linking different organizations together and engaging through strategic campaigning, communications, and policy to help get the job done. And then finally, if you can hit next, we work really closely with lots of partners from different sectors, from companies and coalitions, and our goal really is to drive investment into what we call blue nature so that we can have a stronger and more resilient ocean in the future. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that I've kind of turned the world upside down, which is exactly what we need to do in order to drive the kind of change we need to see. So I'm from the Southern Hemisphere. This is actually the way we think of the world, although I think a lot of other folks turn it the other way around when we think about the maps that we're given. But if you look at the world this way round with Antarctica at the top, essentially it is planet ocean, not planet Earth. And with those fresh eyes, we really need to think about, given everything that the ocean gives to us, how we can turn our world upside down to help it to help us in the future, because ocean health truly is planetary health. And that's why, if we go to the next slide, we all need to rise up together for the ocean. And so we've been working with some of our partners at the Oceano Azul Foundation and at the Oak Foundation to join together and join organizations together on this amazing initiative called Rise Up. It's a blue call to action, and it's basically the prescription for ocean health for the next decade. You can see that each letter is focused on something we need to do for the ocean. And what's unique about this collaboration at Rise Up is that it's the first time that it brings together civil society, fisherfolk, indigenous peoples, philanthropies, and fish workers to call out the bold action we need to safeguard the ocean. If your organization is interested in joining this movement, you can just go to riseupfortheocean.org and sign up and become part of the movement. And you can see that the P in Rise Up is all about protecting at least 30% of the ocean by 2030, which is what we are going to talk about today. So, next slide. If we focus on 30 by 30, really what this is about is how we can restore the ocean to good health. And the science is all completely behind us on this. It is the minimum that the scientific literature has shown we need to protect to regenerate ocean life and build resilience to change. And there are a whole number of things we need to do to get to that 30%. So we need to secure a strong high seas biodiversity treaty. We need countries to act within their own waters to strongly protect at least 30%, we hope, within their waters. We need to get the Convention on Biological Diversity to adopt this 30 by 30 target when it meets next year. And we also need to protect huge areas of the Southern Ocean around Antarctica, and that's how we get to this 30%. But rather than listening to me going on about this, I have invited some friends along to join us and talk to us about how we can protect 30% of the ocean by 2030. So, if we can go to the next slide and listen to Sir Richard Branson, Sir David Attenborough and Shailene Woodley talk to us about what we need to do, that would be super.
Right now, our greatest threat in thousands of years is climate change.
The climate is changing rapidly.
We've got an ugly problem.
This is a force of nature.
We are not hearing it sufficiently.
This is the storm of a lifetime.
We are on the brink of a climate catastrophe.
If we don't take action, the collapse of our civilizations and the extinction of much of the natural world is on the horizon.
The extent of plastic pollution, 8 million tons enter the ocean as trash.
Animals big and small, they're ingesting those.
Slowly choked to death by human waste, animals often dying from being entangled.
It ultimately is poisoning all of us.
We're facing a man-made disaster of global scale.
70% of our Earth's surface is ocean, yet only 2% is fully protected.
If we don't act now, the damage we're causing will be irreversible. But there is hope. If the ocean is one thing, it's resilient.
And the healthier the ocean, the higher the diversity of species, which in turn gives back to all of us.
Get there, we start to treat our ocean like it's part of our family. We protect it.
People are playing their part.
From the big to the small.
Yet the best thing we can do is to let nature run its course.
Imagine a protected wilderness under the sea,
where sea life can recover, a safe haven.
Imagine the creation of a network of these havens all across the globe.
The message is clear. Time is running out. Together, we can make real change happen.
Our aim is to protect at least 30% of the world's oceans
by 2030.
The continuation of our civilizations and the natural world upon which we depend is in your hands.
So, as I said, they were much more inspiring than I could ever be. But we've also got to think, when we think about protecting 30% of the ocean, of what's going on land. And this photograph could really be people anywhere around the world at the moment rising up against systemic racism and injustice over the last 6 months. But if you look closely, the clothes are a bit dated. It's a picture that was taken in 1987 at my university campus in South Africa, where we were rising up to fight against apartheid. 30 by 30 is about replenishing our seas and regenerating marine life. But it's also about rising up for a common future that we can all believe in and be part of. We can just make it about conservation, but it isn't. It's about intersectional environmentalism. It's about the protection of people and the planet. It's about social equality, economic justice, environmental justice, and a healthy future for all of us. So if we go to the next slide, we've really got to think about how we collaborate, about how we work together to break down the barriers and make it clear that our work for ocean health is about social, economic, and environmental justice. I know that Masha is going to provide some ideas about how folks can engage when she speaks, so I'm going to leave that to her. But I did want to add in a few little insights and lessons that I learned from my life. So if we can go to the next slide. In 1994, Nelson Mandela was elected as the president of a free South Africa. That photograph that was taken in the mid to late 1980s shows a world where none of us thought that we would ever see the day that he was sworn in as president. People went to prison, into exile, and died for this cause, knowing that it was right, but not knowing whether we would succeed in the end or not. Next slide. The thing is that we did. And as Madimba said, you know, it always seems impossible until it's done. What I know is that we can win, and we will win on this issue. Our commitment to a just, equitable, and sustainable future is too strong for there to be any other outcome. So we really hope that all of you will climb aboard and rise up with all of us for the ocean and the 30 by 30 goal. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Karen. And if any of you have any questions for Karen in particular, or any of our panelists, remember, just type them into the Q&A box below, and we'll get to them in the second half of this session when we do the Q&A. But next, we've got our panelist, Masha Kalinina. Masha works primarily in policy, coordinating Pew's cross-campaign efforts with the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, or CBD. She has also previously worked through CITES, the convention that focuses on international trade of endangered species, as well as other conventions like that of the Migratory Species and the US Endangers Act. So, Masha?
Thanks so much, Laura, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you guys. I'm just going to share my screen with you. If you just bear with me 1 second. There we go. Okay. Just let me know if it is now full screen. Alrighty. So as Laura mentioned, my name is Masha and I work for the Pew Charitable Trusts, and I coordinate our efforts around securing the 30% marine target in the text of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And I feel like I'm just exiting the youth segment. I'm 35, so I used to be there with you guys in the trenches, but I think I've unfortunately aged out at this point. But here are some photos of the conventions that Laura's mentioned that I worked on in the past. So the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, Convention on Migratory Species, and here we are fighting for sharks at CMS, but also that work has been incredible at CITES as well to get the shark species protected from international trade. And then here, just to give you guys a little bit of kind of my personal adventures, that's part of the perks of this incredible work is we get to meet wonderful people that are passionate about the ocean. And so on the left, I'm in Samoa just earlier this year before COVID hit, where we met with representatives of governments throughout the Pacific, and that's us on a traditional canoe. And then on the right side is me in the Red Sea in Egypt during the last conference of the parties for CBD, actually taking my very first dive. So let's dive into it. The ultimate goal is to get 30% secured as actual text in what is called the Global Biodiversity Framework. That's kind of how we're labeling this new set of targets that will be adopted for the next 10 years. So in January, we had an initial zero draft of the text released. And now in late June, there was an updated version. And I wanted to show you guys what the target actually currently looks like as of June. So by 2030, protect and conserve through well-connected and effective systems of protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures, at least 30% of the planet, with the focus on areas particularly important for biodiversity. So you'll see we're actually, we've made great strides. We already have at least 30% of the planet referenced here. And the reason it says planet is because of this, what Karen mentioned is there's also a terrestrial story here, and there is another parallel call to protect 30% of land. But I would say it is important for us to call out the ocean in this text specifically, because the ocean is often overlooked. We live on land, we see land. It's much easier for us to communicate about what we see, but much of what happens in the ocean is beneath the surface. And so the ocean is often ignored, and we need to ensure that the text of the target says at least 30% of the ocean by 2030. So now I want to share with you guys a bit of a timeline. So we have, as our next important key moment is the UN General Assembly Biodiversity Summit. That's on September 30th. So that's going to be mostly virtual. So that means you'll be able to dial in. And some folks will be there in person in New York at the headquarters. And this is where presidents, so heads of state and ministers will make key statements on the importance of ambition for this new framework. Not just for the oceans, but like the entirety of the whole framework. And there may be some really important announcements here for 30 by 30. Then we have the scientific body, the 24th meeting of SBSTA, as it's called, in tentatively November of 2020. It's also followed by the body on implementation of the convention. This is slated to be in Montreal, Canada, but of course with COVID, there's a lot of uncertainty. But the importance of this meeting is this is where the science representatives from the member countries will actually defend the 30% as a figure. And some may feel like it's too high, some may feel like it's too ambitious. So we need strong countries there advocating why 30% is actually the bare minimum of what we need by 2030. Then the next key moment is we have the third open-ended working group, which will meet in tentatively February 2021. What this is a parallel process that has been established to all of CBD in order to allow countries the time and the space to negotiate the actual text word by word of the new targets that will be set for 2030. So it's already met twice. The third meeting is scheduled for Cali, Colombia, and these are the co-chairs of this process. And then all of this is actually culminating in the 15th Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity. So right now it's scheduled for May 17 to May 30th in Kunming, China, We'll see if this actually pans out as the final date, but this is where the targets will be finally adopted. And so how can youth engage on 30 by 30? So I wanted to highlight just 5 ideas for you guys, but I'm sure there's much more. One is this incredible effort from EarthEcho International and the youth leaders behind this initiative. So incorporating Ocean Echo 30 by 30 into existing youth groups already plugging into post-2020. And so we have the Global Youth Biodiversity Network and the ASEAN Youth Biodiversity Program as just 2 examples. The GYBN is actually a recognized observer to the CBD process. They have a special place where they sit, they can make interventions, they submit comments during open comment period, and if you Google them and go to their website, there's an easy way to plug in. You can actually request virtual meetings with your national focal point. So here I include a link to where the focal points for each nation are listed. What I want to encourage is if you're going to be reaching out to folks, it's best to do it as a group versus individuals so as not to overwhelm folks, and be prepared to share with them why marine protected areas are important to you individually in your community. And I think that focal points often will definitely welcome this kind of input, especially from youth, because we do have limited engagement at this time. And just, I want to flag, and I'll share this on the next slide, we do have some countries which have already committed to 30 by 30. So in terms of reaching out, it's most critical to reach out to countries which have not yet joined one of the coalitions I'll flag. And then you can also inquire with the focal point, or if you Google, if you have national level consultations. So this is when a government will create like a forum, either in person or virtual, to hear from stakeholders. And this is something you can actually participate in person. You can engage at the next upcoming IUCN World Conservation Congress, and I have a quick slide on that in a little bit. And then you can also keep track of the plethora of different webinars that are happening on CBD post-2020 framework. And at the Twitter handle here for you in biodiversity, some of them are highlighted on that page. And dial in, make your voice heard, tell them why 30 by 30 is so important. And this is where I wanted to highlight for you guys the 3 coalitions that are actually spearheading the effort. One is led by Costa Rica and France, the High Ambition Coalition, that calls for protection of both 30% of land and ocean. The Global Ocean Alliance, led by the UK, focused on the 30% ocean target, and Blue Leaders, led by the Belgian government. So I don't have enough time to share with you which countries are members, but maybe that can be part 2 of your engagement with EarthEcho International, is to understand who isn't there yet. And then lastly, I just want to highlight a few external events for you guys that I think are important moments for countries to make their statements in support of 30 by 30. So one is the G20 meeting hosted by Saudi Arabia. Whether it'll be in person, virtual, we will see. The Our Ocean Conference in Palau. So another key moment to talk about all of the critical ocean conservation issues, but also to make statements on 30 by 30 and reinforce the global commitment toward this target. The IUCN World Conservation Congress in France is actually planning a global youth summit. We'll see what it looks like if WCC possibly goes virtual, but youth was a major theme identified for this year, and you'll see that the original idea was to bring together 400 youth and young professionals to make their voice heard. And then finally, and Karen mentioned this in her presentation, the importance of BBNJ. This is, there's a process of negotiating a new treaty that will help us create marine protected areas in international waters beyond the 200 nautical mile. So there is a 4th, and possibly we'll see if there's a 5th session of these negotiations that are slated to happen next year now. And this is so critical because we really can't reach 30% without protecting international waters. And so with that, I welcome your questions and just thank you guys for joining this webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Masha. And don't forget, like she said, any questions for her personally or for any of them, just type them in as we go and we will get to them at the end. But for now, our 3rd and final panelist is Paul Rose. Paul is one of the most experienced science expedition leaders in the world. He is the former Vice President of the Royal Geographic Society and is currently the expedition leader for the National Geographic Pristine Seas expeditions. And if that wasn't impressive enough, he also has a mountain named after him in Antarctica. So, Paul, it's all yours.
Great. Thanks very much for the great introduction, Laura. And thanks, Karen. Thanks for Masha. Very good to join you. I'm joining you from Geneva, Switzerland, which, as you all know, is a long way from the sea. But this event has brought me closer to the sea. I can almost smell it. So thank you very much for having me along and bringing the ocean into Geneva. I'll just share my screen here for a second. Okay, we're off. Well, yeah, thanks, Laura. As you say, I lead the National Geographic Pristine Seas expeditions. We're a busy group, started by a genius called Enric Sala, and he was a professor at Scripps, and realized one day that he, as a prolific scientist, every science report he wrote felt like an obituary for the ocean, he said. And what could he do about it? He had the urge to really do something about it. So that's when he went to National Geographic, proposed Pristine Seas, which on the surface of it seems very simple. Let's find, explore, and help protect the last wild, truly pristine places in the ocean. Well, because it starts with a lot of planning, we have lots of sessions like this, now been replaced by virtual sessions, but these are the fun ones. We're using National Geographic maps, loads of stickies, and we all get together for a few days and plan things. And typically we plan things by scientific case, you know, this place, should this place be protected? We parallel that with the politics, the political opportunity. Is this a good place to go, and match them up? It's relatively simple, but it does take a lot of work from the team based in DC and London. Well, now we've got a third column running down the planning side, and that's called something post-COVID recovery. What's really going to happen with our targets? What's going to happen to the travel on the way? So we're getting very good at working remotely. We've all become semi-professional Zoomers, and we also hope to be back to sea next year with any luck. Fingers crossed. So that's our basic planning, and this is how we do it.
We are defined by the environments that we live in. When they say, where do you come? The first thing that comes to my mind is the reef, the forest, the corals. Maybe that's who I am.
The moment I set my eyes on these remote islands, I know why we're here.
This place is melting like a popsicle in Arizona in the summertime.
The big fish are gone. They have been fished out.
It only takes a few fishing boats and they can remove hundreds of years of biomass in just a very short period of time.
After 10 years as a professor, I realized that I was just writing the obituary of the ocean. I quit academia and assembled a team to do something about it. I want to show to the world what the ocean was like hundreds of years ago and why we have to preserve it. This is one of these rare places on Earth, a time machine, where we can see the ocean of the past.
What we do is hunt out the last pristine places in the ocean and protect them. The ocean has amazing regenerative power. We just need to let it heal itself.
In one single pulse, in one immeasurably powerful heartbeat, the ocean has just changed my life.
Of course, when we arrive on site, one of the first things we do is we meet our ship. We don't have a ship. I think all of us have dreamed of recreating the Cousteau days on Calypso and having our own glorious ship and traveling around the world. But it doesn't quite work because we can't get the ship in the right place at the right time. Often the sequence of expeditions just doesn't fit. So we charter vessels, from big ones like the British Antarctic Survey ship, the James Clark Ross, to one of our favourites, the Argo, which is one of our smallest ships to charter, but she was built as a diving vessel, and she's the home for the yellow submarine you see there, which is called the Deep Sea. So it gives us a lot of capability. Inevitably, before we can get in the water, Dr. Alan Friedlander, our chief scientist, he has to run us through the plan again. And there's always that moment where we're all anxious to get in the water, anxious to begin the experiments, anxious to begin filming, but we take a moment for Alan to remind us what the plan is, what we're going for, and what the priorities are. Eventually we get in, and we have a method that we repeat all over the world, but of course it's adapted to each destination. I mean, all of our science templates want to be the same, but in some places we're wearing shorts and t-shirts and we're diving with sharks like the ones you see behind me. In the very next place we're wearing dry suits and we're on shore with polar bears. And so we need to adapt. And of course, depending which community we're working with, they help us put the whole project together. But we get in, we dive, we love to dive and spend as much time as possible in the water. It's great. We need to take films because we produce, I think we've produced 114 science publications since we got started, very prolific production rate. But along with those science reports, we need images. So we use a big range of cameras. Here's John Betts, one of our directors of photography, and myself setting up a time lapse underwater. We get a lot of good results from time lapses underwater. We do well with remote cameras. These are our pelagic cameras. We leave them at sea for a few hours at a time, and we can then come back. They're on baited rigs, so they bring a lot of animals in and come back, and we can analyze what's been going on. It's a great resource having the pelagic cameras. We also use these drop cameras. You can see there, they're about this big around. They go all the way to the bottom. They've been to the Mariana Trench and back up. They're baited and have a video running, and we have a big success rate in finding new species or first records of species in certain locations. We're not always this lucky though, which is a great thing. This happened to us off Ascension Island, where a very large 6-gill shark managed to put the drop camera in its mouth. So that's one good way of working out how big they are. We also use our films to tell powerful stories. This is us diving at Rapa Iti, and the locals weren't sure or even convinced that there was illegal shark fishing going on. So when you come back with images like this, beautiful Galapagos sharks with abandoned longline hooks in their mouths, it tells a powerful story. Similarly, if we can get in the submarine, tell good stories from depth, we can get the scientists in to do long surveys, 3-hour surveys at 400 meters. And particularly if we can get global leaders and influencers in their waters, sometimes for the first time, to get the opportunity to fall in love with their waters, and sometimes for the first time in their lives, understand what's down there. And as we all know, David Attenborough says, if you fall in love with it, you can protect it. So that is a very key tool for us. Another important tool for us is to be able to communicate live from the expeditions. I mean, 5-10 years ago, this was impossible, but now we can through a National Geographic Explorer Classroom program. It works absolutely brilliantly. We tend to do one near the front of the expedition and one near the end. And through Joe Grabowski, the guy who runs it, he becomes like an international orchestra conductor. And he's communicated with hundreds of schools around the world, so therefore thousands of school children. And they all, as you know, the young ones have all the difficult questions. So they get the opportunity for 45 minutes to ask all of us questions. And it's lots of fun. It looks pretty slick on this end, but on that end, it looks like this. We use my phone because using a phone seems to use a bit less bandwidth. So we have a cheap light phone on a hugely expensive heavy tripod. And then we speak at the camera. It's a huge amount of fun and very satisfying to communicate with the young ones directly from expeditions. We do, whenever we can, host onshore events, typically a pre-departure conference and a post-expedition conference. And on the way, if we're on, like this expedition was the Azores, so we were island hopping. So we had the opportunity to bring young ones aboard and they can get stuck in and see what we're up to. And that's an absolutely brilliant day when we can do that. Obviously, as Karen and Masha and yourself, Laura, said, we're a big part of supporting 30 by 30 any way we can. And I'm particularly excited that we call it a milestone to 50 by 50, you know, the E.O. Wilson Half Earth. And I'm sometimes asked, as I work for National Geographic, what is your most favourite picture or favourite moment of all the work? And of course, it's too complicated to find something with a big science or in-depth need. But I always think of this, and this is my dog being so happy that I returned from a dive in the Northwest Passage on our Arctic expedition, that he hung on to me by biting me in the head. So that was an enormous bite in the head. I've still got the scars on my head, and that was probably one of my most favourite moments of leading the Pristine Seas expeditions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. That was great. And thank you, all three of you, for such amazing presentations. We're now going to go into the Q&A because there's a number of questions coming in. And if you guys, as you hear other answers to questions, if you think of more, just keep adding them in, we'll keep going. I know I definitely have a list after those three presentations, but we'll start off and I will attempt to pronounce all of your names. And if I get them wrong, I'm really, really sorry. But first off, from Charlie Goldberg, do we know what parts of the ocean will be protected, and can we be sure that at least some of every ocean can be protected? I don't know if any of you guys want to take that. If you all want to go, just free.
I can start. If it's firstly, I just have to say, like, it's terrible to speak on a panel with Paul because he just has the most incredible images and fun in everything that he does. Paul, every time we do this, I always think of it. One day, I know. Next time I'm coming with you on the boat. So, you know, I think it's really important that we think about this scientifically. And as Paul said, a lot of the work that Nat Geo does, that Pew does, that we do with partners, Greenpeace has done this as well, and a lot of international scientists are looking at which areas need to be protected and how. And so it's really important that there's connectivity between areas that are protected, that different ecosystems and habitats are represented in all of that, so that when we come to the end, we've actually looked at the planet cohesively and begun to join some of those dots together. I think we're in a place now where, if you look at the math, we're at well below 10% fully protected, and I know one of the questions on the chat is what do we mean about protection, and so for Ocean Unite, and I think for Pew and others, Nat Geo too, we are really focused on fully or highly protected areas. So these are areas where there can be no extractive or destructive activities. All the science shows that the more strongly protected an area is, the better the regeneration and the comeback in terms of biomass, so how many species there are, how big the species are, and how they spill over into other areas. So we all pretty focused on that high protection. The analogy for that is when you think of a protected area on land, a national park, generally those parks are fully protected. We can't go in there and, like, you know, shoot all the deer or the rabbits or everything else, because we need to keep those areas intact. And the same applies to the ocean. So we need to protect those areas intact. There have been maps made by a number of different organizations of the places that need to be protected. Again, it needs to be representative, connected, and intersected, and we really need areas from the Arctic to the Antarctic and everywhere in between.
Maybe I'll just jump in. I just put a link in the chat for you guys. We collaborated with the University of California, Santa Barbara recently to identify what could be the first generation of marine protected areas in the high seas. And so check out the link and you guys will see some wonderful areas in the open international waters that deserve our attention, especially through the BBNJ convention. Thanks.
Great. Great stuff. Yeah, I agree with Karen and Masha. Brilliant answers, of course. And for me, you know, there's a big thing about small, easily accessible marine protected areas that may not be measurable much on a global scale as far as percentage, but they're just invaluable to communicate the value of the ocean. Even some of these, what I think of as accidental marine protected areas, you know, if a marina has been built very smart, or there's wind farms, or there's access nearby, and young ones and all kinds of people, really decision makers, can get in and see what a small protected area, what an impact that can make, then they can better visualize and get behind the big stuff. But of course, we've got to make a difference to the big stuff to save ourselves. But I've got a particular interest in these small local ones.
Great, thanks guys. They're all amazing answers. And then for another one, I think this is directed solely at Masha, because it's from Ivania Johnson, and she says, sharks are considered functionally extinct in 20% of the world's reefs. What can be done to replenish these reefs and bring sharks back to these areas?
Well, I think the answer is 30 by 30. I mean, we need to protect their habitat. And also reduce direct take of sharks. Or eliminate, especially if we have dwindling numbers, as most of you are aware, of the horrific shark finning practice that I used to work for Humane Society International, and that was one of our main objectives, is basically to reduce consumption of shark fin soup. So when you reduce consumption, you reduce take, and that is a massive stress on the species, but also they need a complete ecosystem in order to survive. So all of that is really rolled up in the 30 by 30 message.
Amazing. I actually have a question from me, because we're all talking about 30 by 30 and it's 30%, but can any of you or all of you let us know how far we are currently, like the percentage wise, like how close are we to this? Like we've got 10 years to do it, but we have a starting point and we need to know what that is.
Shall I start? I think we'll see if our numbers all are similar. So there's an amazing website called mpaatlas.org, and you can go there and you can see which places have been protected. Right now, so the UN has a goal of protecting 10% by 2020. We are at probably around 2.5% strongly or highly protected globally, and at around between 7 and 8% of marine protected areas. So of the ocean has marine protected areas, so with some form of protection. So we obviously want to ramp that up. Now, it might sound like we're not very far towards this 30%, but this has literally all happened in the past 10 years. And so, the curve, since we all now know about the curve, this curve is one we want to rise exponentially. Now, we can protect strongly protect at least another 1% of the ocean before the end of this year, and that is because there are discussions going on at the moment in the Antarctic to protect 3 really huge areas. It's something like around 4 million square kilometers of the Southern Ocean in 3 areas of Antarctica. There's a petition out at the moment, and I'll throw the link into the chat so folks can go to that and sign up to it and push it forward. But essentially those decisions need to be made by consensus. There's a group of countries that will make the decision. There are only 2 countries that are outstanding at the moment to agree to that consensus decision. One is Russia and the other is China. I know that EarthEcho and Philippe and Ashlyn have been working really hard to try and press this forward, but this is something we can get done this year. and there's lots in the works in various countries. So we've just got to keep that pressure on, and we've got to get every country acting and adding to those percentages. And as Masha said, with that high seas agreement, that is the way we kind of ramp up all the work towards the 30 by 30 goal. It is completely achievable by 2030. We all just have to get to work and get it done.
Thank you so much. That, yeah, definitely got a long way to go, but we can do it if we try. Looking at the questions that are coming in, we've got quite a few on funding. Even one of my youth leadership members, fellow members, Olivia Blondheim, she's a scientist herself, and she says that one challenge she faces is that so much of science is done in a bubble. There are few comprehensive studies on our oceans ecosystems, and a large issue is funding. So are you guys working to help create collaborations that can allow scientists to contribute to the data of your missions, but whilst also getting the funding you need? And other questions came into how do you get the funding? If any of you want to go ahead with that one.
This one feels very small.
Only to mention on funding that there's been some great reports. These are the headlines that we would have dreamed of, you know, even 6 months ago. Talking about protecting 30% of the planet is a great deal economically. I've really enjoyed some of those reports from World Economic Forum and others that highlight the fact that if we protected 30% of the planet and worked out the costs, the economic return would be about 5 times greater. And there's lots of detail in those reports, but it's really worth looking at those reports and just look at the cost of protecting 30 by 30 and looking for the economic benefits. And it's a real highlight as to the value of doing it. And of course, in the light of COVID-19, we don't have much choice, do we? Because we're now realizing that the health of everybody on the planet is reliant on the health of everybody else, which in turn is reliant on the health of nature. So we are seeing a lot more funding opportunities coming along. It's representing more of an opportunity than it ever was to support environmental conservation programs.
Maybe I can mention Pew has partnered with Conservation International to establish what we are calling the Blue Nature Alliance. And it's basically mobilizing $120 million toward both the improvement of management of existing marine protected areas and the establishment of new marine protected areas over the next many years to come. So there are other partners that are part of this effort, and it's just getting underway now. And then I put in the Q&A, the German government has just announced that it will double its spending on biodiversity from $500 million to $1 billion annually. So there are a variety of efforts like that, both from Germany and UK government, probably United States, which are contributing to other nations in their establishment of marine protected areas. And then Paul made just an excellent point, and I pinged one of the reports that just recently has come out to show us just how valuable it is to create these marine protected areas to our economies. It must be a part of the blue recovery as we are recovering from COVID.
Amazing, thank you. So Karina Lee from China has asked, how do we determine if an area is fully protected, cleaned, restored? Which I think is a big question surrounding this 30 by 30 campaign, is that how do we know that it's successful?
Paul, I think you've been to some of those places and you've seen the recovery, so you may be the best person to speak to this, and then Masha and I can add.
Okay, yes, I certainly can. One thing is, you know, those of us that work in marine science, when we first have those dives in a new place that we've never dived before, and sometimes if we're lucky, perhaps no one has ever dived before, there's an instinct that kicks in. And there's something about when we first go in and realizing, wow, look at the top predators, you know, look at these sharks behind me, and you realize, wow, you know, we're no longer the top of the food chain. We're swimming with these beautiful sharks. Or if we can't see sharks immediately, we can look around and just feel the sense of energy and the coral cover and the type of species and the numbers of fish. And there's an instinct that kicks in with me too. I always look at Alan Friedlander, my chief scientist. I've dived and worked with him so long, I can give a quick glance at him and I can tell instantly if he thinks it's damn near pristine or not. But there is a method of looking, as Karen and Masha say, you go online and you can find it in the index and you can see what is pristine. But it's a bit complicated when we look at what level it maybe has deteriorated before we can restore it. You know, there's sort of 3 steps, isn't there? Protect what we have, restore what's been damaged, and then reset our values so it doesn't happen again. But that restoration is a tricky one, because how much energy does this particular habitat have for it to recover? Because we all know, and we've all seen areas that seem to be beyond restoration, but we still have to give it a go, because there's enough transport, there's enough connectivity maybe with healthy regions that it can recover. And these are brilliant success stories.
And if I can just maybe add one thing to this. So, you know, the most incredible thing about the ocean, and it truly, any marine scientist that you speak to will say that this is something we really have to pay attention to, is its incredible ability to regenerate itself. If we let it alone, it can come back. We are unfortunately getting to a point where, because of the things we've been doing to the ocean, that may no longer be the case. And this is particularly looking at the impacts of the climate emergency on the ocean. So as we look at what will happen to coral reef ecosystems as waters heat up, what is happening in terms of species shifting, and the size of species and everything else, and then add into that pollution from plastics or nutrient runoff, and then overfishing. So what we really need to make sure of is that as we're working towards this 30 by 30 goal, we're making sure that that other 70% of the ocean is properly and sustainably managed as well, and that our activities on land are not driving the destruction of these areas we're trying to protect at sea, which means we all have to commit to net zero as quickly as possible. I mean, people often speak about 2050. We need to look at 2030 again as this critical year for achieving some of these goals. And we've got to work on land to reduce our climate footprint, to reverse what's going on, to shift what's going on in terms of overfishing and pollution as well, as we are protecting these areas. So we give our planet the best possible chance to regenerate, and that in turn helps all of us.
And maybe, Laura, just to give a practical example of what we mean by pristine or highly and fully protected, these are areas that don't permit bottom trawling, they don't permit industrial fishing, they don't permit oil and gas extraction. They don't permit, certain infrastructure like ports, to be developed and built on top of mangroves. So I think we all instinctively understand, but that is actually must be clearly articulated to countries if they are to commit to this objective. And there's an effort by Jane Lubchenco, the former head of NOAA, and other many experts involved in this process to really articulate these categories of minimally, lightly, highly and fully protected areas, and what type of activities are and are not permitted. If we're going to be, really seeing benefits, these areas really must be in that highly and fully category.
Great, thank you guys. And just going back to what you said, Karen, if we leave it alone, it will come back. Just with COVID, with species going back into ecosystems that they haven't been seen in decades, it's definitely the way to go. And going off on that, we have a question that's, what are the biggest challenges when trying to facilitate international cooperation for getting MPAs approved?
Masha, do you want to start and I can add, or the other way around?
Well, I mean, just briefly, I could say in terms of, I'm not sure if this is MPAs approved. I can say the biggest challenge to securing this particular target is we have major fishing nations that have interests to continue extraction from the ocean. Some have the capacity to go into the high seas. And so these countries are generally in opposition to a high protected area target. And so the biggest challenge is getting those countries on board with us. Karen?
Yeah, I would add two things. One is apathy, and the other is that so much of the ocean is out of sight and out of mind that it's just not at the top of the agenda for a lot of countries. So what we need to do in changing this is engage and really kind of push to the forefront some of the countries whose voices are seldom heard. When we were working several years ago on getting to the negotiations that are underway now at the UN, there were probably 12 countries that were deciding what should go on for the global ocean. And it was only when the small island developing states, which we call them big ocean states, they may have small land, but they've got huge ocean real estate. The group of 77 countries, the developing countries, got on board and started making their voices heard and actually partnered up with the European Union. We could then drive some of these agenda items forward in the international policy arena. So we need action from so many of these countries, the small islands, the developing world. We need them to engage. And of course, countries only engage when they hear from their citizens, when they think that it's an issue. All of us from wherever we are around the world are voters, and we may not think that our voices matter, but just picking up the phone or sending an email or an information alert to your environment minister, or even better still, your finance minister or your foreign minister or your president or prime minister, and letting them know that you care about something. You may think that it doesn't mean anything, but it really does, is number one. And number two is every politician loves an amazing photo opportunity with youth. So you guys can play a truly outsized role in helping them getting that photo opportunity, but also getting them to act. And we were working in South Africa a couple of years ago with an amazing group called Youth for MPAs. They went to a public forum. The Minister of Environment was there. The youth stood up and asked the questions that changed the Environment Minister's mind towards designating another almost 4% of their waters in South Africa. So you guys, we need you, as I said earlier, it's time to rise up on this and get your voices heard. We'll give you all the science and all the policy nonsense to go behind it, but we've got to get the youth engaged.
Amazing, and completely agree as someone who is still technically classed as youth herself. I think only just. But there's quite a few questions. You were saying all the different kind of like stakeholders and in like the different regions and things like that. There's quite a few questions coming in about prioritizing fishers and like just the communities that are kind of underrepresented, and how is this initiative prioritizing them, and what is it doing in order to support them as well as getting what we need in the environmental kind of area?
Well, sorry, I didn't quite get it.
There's been quite a few questions about how, well, this initiative, it's all about protecting 30 by 30 and almost reducing like fishing and pollution and things, but how is it also supporting the like the indigenous communities and the communities that rely on fishing?
Got it. Yeah, it's a great question. And of course, what happens is in a fully marine protected area, it could be that the local community will get even better artisanal fishing than it did in the first place. Because, local fisheries don't have an enormous impact. They certainly know often enough how to look after their waters and how to do it sustainably. So you can have near-shore fishing that has gone for generations continue and can be even more profitable than it was before. Say, one of our sites, Tristan da Cunha in the South Atlantic, their near-shore lobster fishery is a terrific thing. and doesn't impact at all the large marine protected area out there. So that works well. And of course, the fish don't know they're protected. And so the spillover effect, as they call it, around the edge of marine protected areas is often really, really good fishing. So it's truly sustainable. You know, marine protected areas work. It keeps and actually enhances local sustainable fishing, and certainly improves sensible, sustainable commercial fishing around the edges.
And another example is we really should be thinking about this. What will happen? What will be the cost if we don't protect marine areas? And a great example of that is mangroves that protect land during extreme weather events, reduce wave size, reduce impact to communities during hurricanes. So if we destroy these natural ecosystems that are there in place, this is an ecosystem service for us. We're not appropriately accounting what nature delivers to us in our GDP, like in our economic structures. And so therefore people are not really used to understanding the economic value of nature. We just take it for granted, and so that's where I think we need to do a better job communicating the benefits of marine protected areas to local communities.
If I can just add, because I think, just to build on what both Paul and Masha have said, I think the environmental community has made mistakes in the past in focusing on marine conservation and protected areas and forgetting about the people. I think we've learned from those mistakes. I certainly hope we've learned from those mistakes. There is incredible knowledge amongst coastal communities and indigenous peoples about the environment in which they live, the oceans that they that are around them and that they live off. And we really have to bring that knowledge and build it into the learning that we do, the areas that are protected, and how we work with those communities. So there's got to be a strong conversation, discussion, a lot of listening, and a lot of collaboration with those communities to build those areas together. And I think that is the way, actually, again, that we get to this 30 by 30 goal even quicker, because, as Paul said, the benefits beyond the boundaries of those reserves are immense. And as Masha added, it's not just about, more fish and bigger fish. It's about resilience. It's about carbon sequestration. It's about keeping communities intact. And as I was saying right at the beginning, that kind of social, environmental, and economic, all of those pieces and those justice elements coming together. And that's how we can build forward to get to this goal, but also towards a healthier ocean and the healthier communities that depend on it.
Definitely. And as you all kind of touched on in that answer about communication and how it's kind of lacked in the past and can't really in the future if this is going to be a success. And we've had quite a few questions about how youth can engage both politically and in the advocacy stage. Like, how can they communicate? What ways can you almost expand on how they can practically, like we can practically do something about it, even if, as much as if we're in isolated communities, because if you take the US, there's quite a few landlocked states and things like that. Just touch on that maybe.
Well, just to pick up on what Karen said earlier about voting, that's one of the first things is to vote. And I always dream, well, at least for the last 5 years, I've often told people I've got this dream of every time I met a politician or a chief executive or a business leader or community influencer, I'd look in their eyes and go, well, I bet she's a diver. You know that look when you've had a brilliant weekend or a brilliant holiday or a massive adventure, and people come in and see you, and that you can tell that they go, what have you been doing? So, I've just been on this amazing trip. They're the sort of people that we want to be our leaders and influencers. And in a perfect world, which I could dream of, imagine if they were all divers. So they had this incredible connection to the ocean. We would all be out of business. We'd be happy. We'd be drinking champagne with you. So I think this is the thing we need to keep in mind, that these the leaders and influencers that we have now globally, and with the lack of multilateralism, which is a personal big disappointment to me. I'm in Geneva, and of course, it was only last year was the year of multilateralism, and had big hopes for it. I feel that we need to reset our values, and one way of resetting the values is to expect more from the people we vote for. So first step is use your vote wisely and analyze who you're voting for.
I guess I would add, we need 30 by 30 to go viral. If there's anything youth is great at, it's going viral. So, fortunately, everyone's on their computers right now, and it is the platform to make sure that we're really getting the ocean to top of mind, especially in preparation for the UN Biodiversity Summit. But I did share those 5 practical ways that youth can be involved in my presentation. So hopefully you guys will get those slides. But in essence, you are a stakeholder, and when governments are coming up with their national position toward these negotiations, if they do have national consultations, you can participate. And then, of course, these organized efforts by the Global Youth Biodiversity Network and the ASEAN biodiversity leaders, they already just know exactly how to plug in here, how to submit comments during open comment period. We actually have one now that ends August 15th. It's just challenging because I think submissions are requested from official registered observers, which these youth groups are. So sharing your points of view and your voice with these already organized efforts, I think is an important way to plug in.
And just to add some final points on this, I think EarthEcho, now that it is engaged in 30 by 30, will be an amazing resource. We have on our website, which is oceanunite.org, a whole page focused on 30 by 30. You can see the video, their resources, their factoids on there. There is a take action page. I'm sure Pew has similar things, as does Nat Geo and the Global Campaign for Nature. So, get online, look at some of the places where you can gather some of that information together, and then bring friends together. If it's virtually now, then that's what we need to do. Any of us can make a change. I think there's this beautiful little analogy that probably everyone has heard, but I'll say it just in case you haven't. There's a little kid walking along a beach, and there are a whole lot of starfishes that have washed up overnight. And the kid keeps bending down and picking up a starfish and throwing it back into the waves. And this child's parent says, "What are you doing? Stop it, that's not going to make any difference." And the child turns around and says, "If I can save just one, I will have made a difference." And that's what each and every single one of us has to do. Even if we change the minds of just one person, we are building this wave of change, we're creating the ripples around us, and that is what we're here to do, which is why, as we say, we need to rise up together for the ocean. The oceans are rising, so must we.
Maybe just one other practical thing, which is, and I've seen this as I've participated in these international conventions, universities sometimes sponsor their students to attend these meetings. So there can be like a delegation. This happened with the American University Law School here. And the organizations like Humane Society International, others I've worked with, they sometimes include young folks on their delegation because, like an internship basically. And then the university will fund the flight and the hotel for that student. So there is a very practical way to see if your university will start a fund like this where they could support a participation of select students to engage in these international conventions.
Amazing, thank you so much. I would love to carry on. We've got so many more questions, but we are at the end. So thank you all for contributing.